what did Jesus and the apostles eat at the Last Supper? Now, we've all seen Da Vinci's famous painting, and you can kind of still make out the food that was on the table, but that was a Renaissance Italian taking a guess at what would have been there. But archaeologists and basically anthropologists have went back and kind of reconstructed what would have been a typical meal for the people at the time, especially around the these feast days and these holy days. So let's get into that a little bit. Now, number one, we know exactly the two most important things that were at the Last Supper. And what are those, Father Rich?
Obviously, bread and wine.
Right.
So that's central. That's definitely there. But the experience of how they would have eaten and what would have been there, it would have been a communal meal. So Delacrosse, you would have loved this because your hands would have been digging into all sorts of goodies on the table.
I don't know whether to take that as a compliment or a jab.
I was just pointing out the fact that even last night, you with that sushi plate that we had, your hands were digging in the sushi plate and there was soy sauce everywhere and somehow pistachio shells. I have no idea how you pair pistachios with sushi.
Talking about Jesus, please.
All right, sorry.
Just through sheer gumption.
It's just a rant.
So what would have been typical? So now there's a lot of conjecture on what the actual date of the Last Supper was because it's kind of hard to figure out, right? Was it a Seder meal? I think even in the Orthodox, they'd say it's a heresy to say it was a Seder meal. Now, it could have had a lot of similarities because that would have been similar food, right? But it's hard to tell, right? A Seder meal would have had a lamb, but even Pope Benedict said that the lambs had not been yet slaughtered because the lambs are always slaughtered ritually around that time of year.
Good Friday.
Yeah. But Jesus was the actual new lamb. So there wouldn't have been lamb at the Last Supper, right? Which I think is pretty interesting. But then again, maybe not. But I trust Pope Benedict.
Mm-hmm. With my whole heart, I trust his teaching.
So the things that these anthropologists and these archaeologists conjecture would have been there would have been something called a collant, right? It's kind of like, like baked beans almost, right? Or if you've ever had it's kind of like beans and vegetables, kind of like a stew, like a bean stew. They would have had olives.
Definitely
and
olives.
hyssop, which is a kind of like a mint type thing. They would have had probably bitter herbs. They would have had things like celery. They would have had a charoset, which is a charoset's kind of like a fig jelly or a fig preserves. They take the figs and they're able to make it last longer.
How did the apostles make this distinguish? I mean, because right now, obviously, we celebrate Mass. We don't have all the beans and the olives and everything. But this was the Last Supper. This was the institution of the Eucharist, the presence of God and bread and wine. And so you look at Acts of the Apostles and the masses that were said, right? The celebration of this liturgical event that occurred and it being brought forth into communities. How did they distinguish that it was only the bread and the wine that we should use to celebrate this at some point?
Well, Father Rich, I think you say this every day.
Yeah, and Jesus just literally said, "Do this in memory of me." So there was, when he took bread and blessed and broke it, the emphasis within the table dynamics absolutely shifted and changed. And when he was revealing himself as the unblemished lamb that was to be sacrificed, doing this liturgical action in his work in the world, liturgia, the sense of what is that work? So the work that he's working out is salvation by becoming that atoning sacrifice. So he's expressing, this is my body, this is my blood offered up for you. So he's fulfilling, the prophetic voice of the ritual practices of the children of Israel all the way up to the present day and what we still uphold. So the dynamic shift that happens at the table at the Last Supper is so important to recognize in the midst of this gathering.
And it was recognized by the apostles.
Absolutely. And that's why I always try to say this to our community. It's like, we don't want to uphold transactional Catholicism. I don't want you to just come in, receive the Eucharist and split. No, you should be bringing food here. You should be setting out your blankets and having the kids play and having a communal meal together. That's where we should be ordered, living in common with one another. From this Eucharistic dynamic of doing this in memory of Jesus, we need to be able to enter into a deeper form of community with one another.
Yeah, I mean, it's very important to focus on bread and wine because he was establishing the new and everlasting covenant. And you don't hear in Mass, and then after they had eaten, he took the bean stew in his holy and venerable hands, right? Because, it was a very specific action, right? He took the charo set in his holy and venerable hands.
Look at this jelly.
Yeah. He didn't say this. Take these beans, this is my body, right? So, there was a very specific intent with the institution of the Eucharist.